PlayStation. It's a word. It's a name. And this name means a lot of different things depending on who you ask. To your grandfather, it might just be a catch-all term. To him, all video games are the PlayStations. Others might associate the name with memories of nostalgic youth, the good old days of cigarette butts and Pizza Huts. To the residents of Cedar Rapids, PlayStation is Iowa's best place for indoor family fun. And these PlayStation consoles, they get around. The worldwide sales figures are just ooh up. Except for here in America, the Xbox has outsold PlayStation last gen and is actually pretty close to this gen. If everybody was just going out and buying the best product for the price, which is a good rule of consumerism, you'd think there'd be more consistency. Yeah, something else is going on. Something about brands. So, to figure out the reason for all this, you gotta go back to, Nintendo was booming and Sony was coomin'. They wanted to team up for something that would change the world. We're talking take a CD-ROM, put it in a Super Nintendo. That's in vitro fertilization. Shove it in, yeah boy, that's hot. And now you got a PlayStation. So a few years pass and it's time to go public with this. Sony's all excited and they tell everybody, hey, yeah, we're teaming up with Nintendo. It's gonna be amazing. But right after Sony breaks the news, Nintendo announces, nah, they've changed their mind. They don't want to do it anymore. They want to go off and work with Philips because, yeah, they don't want as much money. So Nintendo goes off into the sunset with its new friend and Sony's just left there to sit in the corner and cry. Now, most of the Sony head higher-ups really didn't give a shit about video games before this. I mean, who cares? It's just a fad. Just another bop it. But now, Nintendo was playing dirty, being a little dirty girl, and Sony wasn't having none of that. They were going to show them that they didn't need them. They could make it on their own. PlayStation is now available. Hooray! You can go out and buy one right now if you really want to. Now, by this point, Nintendo was still chugging along with this thing. They were working on stuff for the future, but we ain't there yet, son. The other competition was, the 3DO. It was cool. It was a little expensive. Sega was probably dead in a ditch or whatever, and Atari, who cares? Really? Yeah. See, Sony, they were smart. They knew that if you market stuff towards kids, teenagers aren't going to be interested in your product. They ain't gonna buy it. It's kiddie stuff. But if you advertise towards teenagers, you'll get them and all their disposable income, and the kids will want it even more. The kids want to be cool too. Sony understood this. Too bad for Nintendo, because they got stuck with the stigma of a kiddie company for little stupid babies, and no self-respecting individual over the age of 7 wanted to be seen playing Donkey Kong 2. Sega used to fill this position of the rad dad alternative, the hip and with it choice for those in the know. But yeah, as I said, they died or something, and Sony wasn't going to take time off to mourn. No, Sony wanted PlayStation to fill that gap. And I don't think even Sony fully grasped what they had just achieved. The whole video game thing was still pretty new, and nobody expected it to become what it is today. At this point, being the choice brand for mature gamers was still a novel idea. I mean, even Sega didn't push it that hard. PlayStation wanted you to know it wasn't just for kids or even teenagers. This was for full-ass men. Now, that was just step 1 of the PlayStation playbook. They also had a few other things up their sleeves. First off, CDs. Yeah, remember that? That's why this all started in the first place. Remember, this is the 90s. CDs still exist, and people probably used them. Now, being able to listen to music on this thing, it's not the biggest deal. I mean, even back then, it wasn't like the main selling point, but it's there. It helps. More importantly, CD-ROMs are just better than cartridges. They were expensive to make. They're expensive to buy, hard to store, and they couldn't hold that much information. You had to produce cartridges far in advance, months or years or something. Probably not that long. Order a bunch of them so you don't run out of stock. And if you don't manage to sell all those copies you ordered, you're out of luck, bucko. Now, Sony wasn't the first to have this idea to go to CDs, not by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, it was the first that people remember. It succeeded. Also, PlayStation managed to do something quite important that Nintendo had not. They made the developers of games actually like them. Nintendo were just awful to everybody at this time. I mean, they were a fucking monopoly for so long. If you wanted to make games that had any chance of succeeding, you had to go through them, and they knew that. All the cards in their little pockets, in their overalls. And yeah, a couple companies got up and said, we want to change this. and they tried, and they failed. But Sony, they just made it work. The console sold well enough that people wanted to make games for it, and those games made the console sell even better. Now, Nintendo's response to all this newfound competition was pretty underwhelming, honestly. Yeah, 64, you Mario Kart, whatever. The 64 was much more powerful than the PlayStation by no small margin. The launch lineup was, oh, there's Mario. But the most important attribute of a game console is the games. And besides Nintendo's own properties, this thing did not have a lot going for it. Now, compared to the PlayStation, when you have this and this and this, and most people don't differentiate between a game made by Sony for the PlayStation and a game that's only on PlayStation but isn't made by Sony. Alls they know that, and alls they care about is, hey, I can only get this on the PlayStation. And yeah, Sony won. PlayStation, yeah. Guess what, fuckers? Sega's back from the dead, and they found a new king in their castle. But they've got the power of dreams on their side, and they ain't going down without a fight. But what's this? Sony, you dog, a new console. Well, the Dreamcast didn't last long, but Sony hadn't actually won this generation just yet. I mean, people speculated that when this new Nintendo machine dropped, and Microsoft had this box thing that was coming out. Well, PlayStation's gonna be old hat, man. I mean, we already knew on a technical level, the competition was just better than the PlayStation 2. And the GameCube was cheaper. It had the Mario and the Luigi, and the Xbox. It was a powerhouse. It had the Master Chief and the car. But you know what? They still won. You want to play games and get a DVD player? Well, you could buy this and this, or just buy this. A lot of people didn't know that an Xbox could do the same thing if you just bought this attachment, so, you know. I'm sure that a lot of parents bought this for their kids because of this reason. Get the kid a new toy, and you get to watch Like Mike on the weekends. But this console still had a pretty high attachment rate of the games to console ratios, so this definitely wasn't the only reason. And of course, the games. Not Sony-made games. These didn't really do much. But first off, if you already had a PS1, you're good to go. Just plop that disc in and you're gaming, buddy. Made the transition a lot easier, especially since we didn't really see that a lot before. As for new games, well, now, the reason the PS2 had so many games wasn't because the PS2 was just such a great console. It was actually kind of the opposite. Since the PS2 had weaker hardware, you know games aren't gonna look that hot whether you put 10 million or 100 million into your product. To a small development team, this was fucking magic, because they could make games that look pretty close to the AAA giants since the bar is set so low. And those AAA guys, they can put less money into their projects, and that means bigger margins. As this thing sold more and more, it just made sense to just make games for the PS2. This thing became a goldmine, and everybody wanted in. But something that has always interested me is just how much this console sold. It destroyed everything in its path. Everything that came before and everything that has come since. You got Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and/or Clank, Steambot Chronicles, and the big one. You ready? You ready? That's right, Grand Theft Auto. 2001, when GTA 3 was released, it was a big deal. You got a big old open world, third person, nothing else was like it. The Dreamcast had already been discontinued, and the PS2 was the only next-gen console that was out. So because of all this, it just became a PlayStation exclusive out of necessity. This causes PS2 sales to surge, and of course, Sony takes notice. The next E3, Sony announces that Take-Two will be making GTA games exclusively for PS2. That. Whoa! Well, this will only last for like 2 years, but still, the franchise was huge. Maybe the biggest franchise of that era, and Sony jumped in right before things were really about to take off. And these games, they were system sellers. People would buy a PS2 just to play this, and more sales means more people that would work on games for the PS2. I've said it many fucking times, but that's because it's important. Now, is it just because of GTA that the PS2 did so well? Maybe, kinda. The other factors I talked about definitely kept the console relevant in the first place, and the PlayStation name, the success of the console that came before, it's a big deal. But having the biggest games, and those games being only on your platform, that's the biggest deal. I like to think of PlayStation as that guy who just stays quiet and seems pretty average until he gets one thing going for him, one thing to boost his ego, and then yeah, he's just an ass. Yeah. Cause yeah, Sony was on top, and they knew it. The PS1 could have been a fluke, but having two smash hits that were this smashing, they were winning, and they knew they were probably gonna win again. When a company wins too much, it gets cocky. For Sony, all of this manifested as the PlayStation 3. See, Sony never really had a piece of hardware worth hyping up before, but the PS3, this could be something. For years, we've heard about this new cell processor. What could it do? What couldn't it do? Thing's a supercomputer on a chip. Gonna be 2 teraflops. The military is gonna use it to fly planes. Lots of stuff in tech gets misconstrued to sell stuff. Even today, people say the PS3 processor is better than a modern CPU. It's not. And usually the people that say this shit work for the company that it benefits. So take it with a grain of salt, okay? The hype train doesn't stop. And by the time it reached the station, by the time reality came crashing down, it hurt. The PS3 was not great to work on, to develop games for, which is kind of counterproductive to everything we've learned about the brand so far. Could it do some cool shit? Yeah, but took time, took money, and for most developers, it was definitely not worth it. So if you go back and play a lot of games, they're actually better on the cheaper Xbox 360. And that's another thing, this thing was really expensive. From the frame rates to the online gameplay, this thing didn't have a lot going for it. And since Sony didn't have this overwhelming market force, the fact that everyone just wanted to make games for their console and their console alone, well, they were playing a fair fight against the competition, and they were losing. The PlayStation brand name carried a lot of weight, but it did have its limits, and this showed. With Sony's ego destroyed, they started pumping out new exclusives, trying to get some goodwill, because this is the hardest the PlayStation brand has ever had it. A time where the product was just not good. And you know what? They still made it out. Better than okay. Because, we'll get to that, that's the whole point of the video. So modern day, you know this story. I don't think I need to tell you the history of this. The PS4, Xbox One, Microsoft fucks up. PS4 used games, and the PS4 has a big lead over the competition in sales. Again, worldwide. In the US, it's still a pretty close race. But consoles nowadays are different than years past, because these machines are basically identical. Again, exclusives don't sell that much, so they don't really factor in as much as some people spout off about. The reason I keep bringing up region is because the sales don't come because people want the hardware itself, it's because they want the brand. See, the Xbox brand is American, not just that it's based in America. No, I mean it focuses its marketing brunt in America. Microsoft didn't have a great foothold in the other regions when the first console launched, and they certainly won't be getting it now, because everybody has predetermined preferences for products, brands they trust, and for something as expensive and frivolous as a game console, it makes sense that most people just stick with what they know. Those years of PlayStation dominance, the 90s and the early 2000s, they create a culture that sees PlayStation as synonymous with console gaming. And for the countries that didn't get that big Xbox hype of the early 2000s, well, that never really changed. And of course, PlayStation uses this to their advantage. Why else spout stuff like sales figures at an event like E3? Because they're trying to make their fans feel like when they win, you win. You're a part of something bigger. No. You're part of the PlayStation family. We're on your side. We love games so much. Fuck off right now. This is a classic marketing technique to keep people coming back, to feel investment in a brand that surpasses just a single product. Good sales of a console just means companies won't have to try as hard to sell you stuff, you fucking idiots. But all of this culture of a brand, the assured success generation over generation, that's earned over decades. Will the PS5 outsell the Xbox Series X? Yeah. Will it outsell it in America? Maybe. And that's why Sony still has to try, because they don't have the big market nailed down. You could say every console manufacturer has something going for it. There's some core attribute that, if you look back, really defines what they are. Microsoft has the deep pockets, can get out of any problem. Nintendo has these characters, the Yoshi, the Goomba. And PlayStation, well, they have their name. This is Tyler of Knowledge Hub.